My name is Fiona Walsh. I am 31 years old, and I have been married to my husband for 6 years. Last month, we threw a dinner party at our house to celebrate his promotion at work, the kind of night that was supposed to be warm and full of people we loved. About 40 minutes in, my mother-in-law stood up from her chair, looked across the table at our guests, and told everyone I had been lying about who I was since the day I married her son. She said I had faked my college degree. She said my entire career was built on a fraud. She even held up printed documents she claimed were proof. The room went completely silent. My husband looked at me like he had never seen me before. But I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. I just reached across the table, picked up my phone, and said 4 words that made her go pale. Let me pull that up. But before I get to what happened next, let me tell you who these people are and how we got to that dinner table. My husband's name is Patrick. We met in our mid-20s through mutual friends, dated for 2 years, and got married in a small ceremony in upstate New York. He is kind and patient and genuinely one of the best people I have ever known. His mother, Sandra, is a different story entirely. From the moment Patrick told his family about me, Sandra made it clear that she had reservations. She never said it directly, not at first. She would ask questions that sounded polite on the surface but carried something sharp underneath. Where exactly did you go to school? Oh, I've never heard of that program. What does your family do? How interesting. She had a way of looking at me when I answered, just long enough to make me feel like she was deciding whether I was worth the effort of believing. Patrick always said she was just protective. He would tell me to give her time, that she warmed up slowly, that she was like that with everyone, and I tried. For 6 years, I tried. I showed up to every family holiday. I brought food, helped clean up, asked about her book club and her garden and her sister's knee surgery. I did everything right, and still, every time we left one of those gatherings, I would sit in the passenger seat of our car and feel a quiet exhaustion that I couldn't quite explain to anyone who hadn't experienced it themselves. The thing about someone like Sandra is that she never does anything you can point to clearly. There are no scenes, no shouting matches. It is always a comment here, a look there, a question asked, just loudly enough for others to hear. You look tired, Fiona. Are you sleeping okay? Does Patrick still do most of the cooking? She had a gift for making everything sound like concern when it was really something else. About a year into our marriage, she started bringing up my career. I work in pharmaceutical compliance. Essentially, I make sure clinical trials follow federal regulations. It is detail-heavy, unglamorous work that most people don't fully understand when I describe it, which Sandra took as an opportunity. She would say things like, I never quite understood what it is you actually do, or Patrick mentioned something about a certification. Is that the same as a degree? The implication was always just slightly out of reach, just deniable enough that if I reacted, I would look like the one creating a problem. I have a bachelor's degree in biology from the University of Connecticut and a graduate certificate in regulatory affairs from Northeastern. I worked hard for both. I passed my RAP certification exam on the first try. None of that was ever in question, not anywhere except in Sandra's mind, where she seemed to have decided long ago that I had slipped past her somehow. Patrick's promotion changed something in her. He had just been named regional director at his company, a job he had worked toward for 3 years. I was proud of him in the way that you can only be proud of someone when you have watched them work and worry and push through setbacks. We decided to celebrate with a dinner party, close friends, a few colleagues of Patrick's, and family. Sandra and Patrick's father, Richard, were invited, of course. His sister, Jenna, came with her boyfriend. A couple from our neighborhood who we'd grown close to over the past few years. My best friend from college who was visiting from out of town that weekend and stayed with us. I spent 2 days getting ready for that dinner. I made a roast chicken with herb butter, roasted potatoes, a green bean salad with toasted almonds. My friend helped me set the table and we put candles out and dimmed the overhead light, and it looked genuinely like something from a magazine. Patrick kept walking through the kitchen saying it smelled incredible and squeezing my shoulder, and I remember thinking, this is exactly what a good night is supposed to feel like. Sandra arrived 20 minutes early, which she always did. She walked through our front door, kissed Patrick on both cheeks, and handed me a bottle of wine with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Then she moved through the house the way she always did, slowly, looking at things, making small comments. You've rearranged the living room. Did you do something to the hallway? She never said anything was wrong. She just made you feel like she was keeping score. Dinner started well. Everyone was in a good mood. Patrick's colleague was funny, my friend kept the conversation easy, and Richard was genuinely warm the way he always was. Sandra sat at the far end of the table, and I noticed she was quieter than usual, which I thought was odd. She wasn't engaging the way she normally did. She was watching. About halfway through the main course, there was a brief lull in conversation, the kind that happens naturally when everyone is eating, and Sandra set down her fork. She said she wanted to say something, that she had been sitting on it for a while, and she didn't think it was fair to keep quiet any longer. Patrick looked over at her with mild concern and said, "Mom, what is it?" She reached into her handbag, which was hanging on the back of her chair, and pulled out a small folder. She placed it on the table. She looked around at the guests. Not at Patrick, not at me, but at the guests. The way you look at a room when you want an audience. Then she said she had done some research because she wanted to make sure her son was with someone honest. And what she found, she said, was troubling. The table went quiet. Patrick's colleague stopped mid-bite. My friend looked at me quickly and then away. Sandra opened the folder and took out 2 printed pages. She said she had contacted the University of Connecticut to verify enrollment records and that when she provided my name and graduation year, the registrar's office had no record of a Fiona Walsh completing a degree in that period. She held up one of the pages, which had what looked like an email header on it, and said she had it in writing. Patrick turned to me slowly. His face had gone through 3 different expressions in about 4 seconds. Confusion, discomfort, and something that looked almost like dread. He said my name. Just my name. Quietly, with a question mark at the end. The whole table was looking at me. Here's what I want to tell you about that moment. I was not afraid. I was not panicking. Because 6 months earlier, completely by coincidence, I had gone through the exact same verification process Sandra claimed to have done, except I had done it for a job application that required a formal credential check, and I had the results right there in my email inbox. I also knew something else, something that I had been sitting on for a while and hadn't yet decided what to do about. I picked up my phone from the table beside my plate. Patrick watched me. Sandra's chin lifted slightly, that barely perceptible movement she made when she thought she had already won. I said calmly, "Let me pull that up." Sandra frowned almost imperceptibly. She said there was nothing to pull up, that she had already done the research. I nodded. "I know," I said, "but I had mine done too, professionally." I opened my email, found the credential verification report from the background check service my company had used 6 months earlier, and held up the screen toward Patrick first. He leaned in, read for a moment, and then looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read yet. I turned the phone to show the table. The report listed my full legal name, my degree, the institution, the graduation year, and a confirmation status of verified. Patrick's colleague, who happened to have HR experience, said clearly, "That is a third-party verification. Those are the gold standard." Sandra's expression shifted. She looked down at her papers and back at my screen. She said the registrar told her there was no record, that perhaps the background company had made a mistake. I set my phone down. I said gently, "I think I know what happened, because I actually looked into this last year when the same issue came up in a credential check at work." Sandra went still. I explained, "When I graduated, I was enrolled under my maiden name, Fiona Callahan. I changed my name when Patrick and I married, and the university's public-facing record system doesn't automatically link the 2 names without an official name change request, which I had never filed because I had no reason to until the credential check flagged it. The background check company had access to the original enrollment records and cross-referenced my social security number and graduation documentation, which is why their report came back accurate. Sandra had called the registrar using my married name alone and gotten a non-match response, which is not the same as no record. The table was very quiet. I reached back into my phone and opened a second document, This was the email thread I had exchanged with the registrar's office last year when I sorted out exactly this issue. It showed the back and forth, the confirmation that my maiden name records were intact and verified, and a note from the records administrator explaining the name linkage process. Patrick looked at the email, then at his mother. Sandra opened her mouth and then closed it. But here's the part I hadn't gotten to yet. I said there was one more thing, and I want to be careful about how I say this, because I had been sitting on it for 2 months without knowing exactly what to do. Patrick looked at me steadily. He said, "What is it?" I said that after the credential issue came up at my job and I sorted it out, I mentioned it to Sandra in passing at a family dinner because I thought she might have had the same confusion about my name change. I told her exactly what I had just told this table, that my records were under Callahan, that the name link hadn't been filed, and that I'd resolved it. The table went very quiet again, but in a different way this time. Patrick said slowly, "When was that?" I said it was about 8 weeks ago. He turned to his mother. "Sandra?" Sandra looked at the tablecloth. She didn't say anything right away. I said I wasn't trying to make accusations, but she had known for 2 months that the name discrepancy was a known, resolved administrative issue, and she had still printed those pages and brought them to this dinner. Jenna, Patrick's sister, put her hand flat on the table and looked at her mother and said, "Mom." Richard, Patrick's father, sat back in his chair and rubbed the back of his neck. Sandra finally looked up. Her voice, when it came, was thinner than usual. She said she had wanted to be sure. She said a mother was allowed to want to be sure. Patrick spoke quietly. He said, "You already knew. You had the information. You came here and did this anyway." Sandra started to say that she had thought perhaps there was more to it, that she hadn't been fully convinced. Patrick said her name once, the way you say someone's name when you want them to stop talking. The table sat in silence for a long moment. My friend, who had been still as furniture through all of this, reached under the table and found my hand and squeezed it once, briefly, and then let go. Richard was the first to speak. He said he was sorry. He said it directly to me, not to the table, not to the room. He looked at me and said he was sorry and that this was not all right. I thanked him quietly. Patrick looked at me and I looked at him, and there was a whole conversation in that. The kind that doesn't need words when you've been with someone long enough. Sandra did not apologize that night. She collected her papers and put them back in the folder and placed the folder in her handbag and sat very still for the rest of the dinner. She left early, before dessert. Richard stayed. He helped clear the plates and hugged me at the door before he left and said again that he was sorry. The next morning, Patrick sat down at the kitchen table with his coffee and told me he had called his mother. He said the conversation was hard, but that he had told her clearly what the line was. He said she tried to deflect, and then, eventually, she'd cried. And he had told her the crying was not the same as understanding what she had done. He said she would not be invited to our home again until she could sit across from me and say directly that she had been wrong. I asked if he thought she ever would. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he honestly didn't know. But he said that was her problem to solve, not mine. 3 weeks after the dinner, Sandra called me. I almost didn't pick up. When I did, she was quiet for a moment on the other end. And then she said, "I want to say I'm sorry." Her voice sounded different, smaller, somehow, and tired. She said she had spent a long time believing she was protecting her son, and that she had confused protection with control, and that she had treated me unfairly for a long time. She said the dinner was a new low and that she was ashamed of it. I didn't tell her it was fine because it wasn't. I didn't rush to reassure her. I said I appreciated that she called and that I hoped she meant it. She said she did. I don't know what happens next between us. That is honest. I don't know if we ever get to a real warmth or whether it stays careful and managed and polite, but I know that something shifted that night. Not because I humiliated her, because I didn't. Not because I won, because it was never supposed to be a competition. It shifted because the truth was just sitting there in my phone the whole time, patient. And when the moment came, I didn't panic and I didn't beg, I just showed it to the room. Patrick and I cut the celebration cake after Sandra left. It was a good cake. The candles were the trick kind that relight when you blow them out, which our neighbor had thought was hilarious to bring. Patrick and I stood there blowing and laughing, and our friends were laughing, and for a moment, in the middle of all of it, I thought, this is the part that is real. This is what actually lasts. I keep thinking about the candles, the trick ones that wouldn't stay out, that kept relighting no matter how many times Patrick and I blew them down. We were laughing, our friends were laughing, and somewhere in the middle of that, I thought, this is still here. After everything that happened that night, this is still here. I don't think Sandra set out to be a cruel person. I've thought about that a lot in the week since. She told herself she was protecting her son, and I believe that she believed it. But somewhere along the way, protection became something else. A need to be right. A need to remain the most important woman in Patrick's life. A need to find a crack in me that would justify the story she had already decided to tell. What she didn't account for was that I had been living honestly the entire time. And honest living has a way of holding up under pressure in a way that manufactured stories simply don't. That's the part I want to sit with, not the victory of it. It never felt like a victory. Not really. But the quiet fact that I didn't have to scramble. I didn't have to invent anything or outmaneuver anyone. I just had to show what was already true. The credential report was there because I had done the actual work. The email thread with the registrar was there because I had addressed the problem directly when it came up, the right way, through the right channels. I had nothing to hide because I had nothing to hide. That's not a small thing. That's actually the whole thing. I think about what would have happened if I had panicked. If I had cried or raised my voice or tried to argue Sandra down in front of everyone. Nothing good would have come from that. The guests would have seen two women fighting and walked away uncertain about who was telling the truth. Patrick would have been stuck in the middle, choosing based on emotion rather than evidence. The truth would have gotten buried under the noise of the conflict itself. Staying calm wasn't just a personality trait that night. It was a decision, and it was the right one. There is a kind of quiet strength in knowing what you know and waiting for the right moment to show it rather than defend it. And then there is this, Sandra called. I didn't expect her to. I had mentally prepared for the possibility that she never would, that the dinner would simply become the permanent dividing line in our relationship. But she called, and when she did, she said the words. Not perfectly, not without some residual defensiveness in her voice, but she said them. I appreciated that more than I expected to. Not because it fixed everything. It didn't. But because it meant she was capable of looking at what she had done and deciding to be better than it. That takes something. It is not easy to call someone you have underestimated for 6 years and admit, even partially, that you are wrong. I learned something about myself that night, too. I had spent a long time absorbing Sandra's doubt about me, letting it sit somewhere in the back of my mind, and occasionally wondering if she saw something I didn't. That night showed me she didn't. The doubt was always hers, not mine. And I had been carrying it around like it belonged to me. I don't think I'll make that mistake again. Patrick cut the cake with me. The candles kept lighting back up. We laughed until our eyes watered, and I thought, I built this. Carefully, honestly, one day at a time. Nobody gets to take that.